Hello, friends. Robert Bevan here, author of the Caverns Creatures series of comedy, fantasy novels, and short stories. With me is Sam West, and we'll be talking about the spell Sleet Storm today. Sleet Storm, Sam, what are your thoughts?
I think it can be one of the most overhyped spells in the game. I think Sleet Storm on average is quite bad. It has moments where it will be powerful. Those moments I think are less common than you'd think. And I think most encounters won't get a lot out of Sleet Storm, especially as the game gets higher and higher level and creatures stop walking on the ground. This spell gets particularly bad. But for a third level slot, we're kind of at as low level as this can be. And it just doesn't compete well against the other options you really have at your disposal, I don't think.
Yeah, I learned that the hard way in a game I played recently. But let's see if I can learn from this and do better next time. What does it do?
Okay, this is a more complicated spell than I think it should be, but it does a lot of text. So it affects a 20-foot tall cylinder and a 40-foot radius for a minute, retaining your concentration. So you have to concentrate on this. It hits a 20-foot tall cylinder with 40 feet wide. Mm-hmm. In that area, it is heavily obscured. Heavily obscured means when you're looking into the area, basically, vision is blocked entirely. If you're in the area or looking into the area, you're treated as blinded for that condition. So if you're in the area, you are functionally blinded. That is what the heavily obscured condition or sort of text does. It's not a condition, but basically it. Because it functionally makes you blinded, what blinded does is you automatically fail any checks that rely on sight, and attack rolls against you have advantage, and your attack rolls have disadvantage. Now, notably, if two things are in or like at the heavily obscured area, both functionally are blinded, which means the attack rolls having advantage against the other are going to be at disadvantage, meaning it basically is a net zero. Attacking something while both are in the Sleet Storm is functionally unaffected by the Sleet Storm. I think that's an important caveat because both characters are blind. If you're playing a character with blind sight, if you're playing characters that otherwise can get around blinded, that is an upside here. That's not most characters, though. The other important thing to note about Sleet Storm is the ground is the only area that is considered difficult terrain. Well, there's two other things. The first is that the ground is considered the only difficult terrain. That means creatures that are flying through it, creatures that are crawling on the walls, creatures that are hovering through it, entirely unaffected by the difficult terrain. This as a third level spell means most things aren't going to be doing that yet, but there will be some. And that makes it kind of unfortunate because things can dash through relatively easily. If they have to go on the ground, they can't dash through it. That's pretty important, at least from one far side to the other, because it goes 15-15 as opposed to 30-30. So if things are flying through it, they're just going to get right through it, no problem whatsoever. If things are, doing any of the other things that I mentioned that aren't walking, no problem at all. The other thing that it does is whenever anyone enters the area, not the difficult terrain, when anyone enters the spell's area, they make a save or fall prone. That is the best part of the spell, I think. And what it notably does with flying creatures is flying creatures, if they aren't being magically held aloft, they fall to the ground and then are affected by the difficult terrain as they go to walk. That's something. In the prone condition, things within 5 feet of a prone creature have advantage on attack rolls against them, and they have disadvantage until they get up. But you just spend half your movement to get up. So it does somewhat lock down an area, is the idea.
Pretty big area too. 40-foot radius. 40 feet is
pretty large, yes. 40-foot radius is going to cover a large space. Oh, I'm sorry. So it would take 2 dashes to get through this if it weren't for the difficult terrain. You're right. So it's 80 feet wide. Very large. The reason I don't think Sleet Storm is very good is the situations where you want to cast Sleet Storm are going to be exclusively ones where you're trying to escape. If you aren't trying to kill the things that you are fighting currently, that is when Sleet Storm is at its best because it sort of shuts down an encounter. It says no one is going to do anything to anyone else because everyone in this enormous area is blinded. Anyone trying to run is not going anywhere quickly. And you can somewhat mitigate the knowledge of where you are. This is a giant area of effect that's objective is fundamentally to shut down an encounter. And that's really all it does.
I mean, if you've got other casters with other area of effect spells, it can be, locking them down, and that could be beneficial for attacking them. Like a Sleet Storm. Go ahead.
So here's one of the issues then. You don't necessarily know where they're going to get locked down in, and you get some weird metagaming moments. So the DM's going to have to roll a lot in secret here whenever monsters enter into the area. And because we're looking at such a wide area, if creatures are dashing through the Sleet Storm, Fireball's hitting a 40-foot wide diameter, right? 20-foot radius. So that only covers half of it, which means there will be situations where you'll be firing fireballs and hitting conceivably nothing or less targets than you expect because you are blind to what's in the area as well. You can't see anything in the Sleet Storm. If you are in the Sleet Storm yourself, you're just blind to everything, right? So, we're talking about situations where this is on the Druid, Sorcerer, Wizard, and people don't tend to like to play classes that do the same thing. I think you're most likely going to see a Druid and a Wizard in the same party. So like a Druid will cast Sleet Storm, the Wizard will fireball things. In that instance, though, you're spending one of your third level spell slots on hitting potentially nothing or hitting less creatures than you could hit. You're just guessing at an area because you can't see what's in there, right? You don't know what you're shooting at because it's covered in a Sleet Storm. That's where I think the spell gets quite a bit worse. If you can have spells that cover the area of it, if you have big things like Circle of Death, sure. But you also need to know that things have gone into the Sleet Storm. Once you cast the Sleet Storm, things can just not enter it, right? Things can just be like, that's a bad idea. I'm going to go around the gigantic area of Cold Death. If you cast it on those creatures, they have no choice. So that's nice. If you're like, all right, there's 12 creatures there, Sleet Storm around them, big area they are stuck in for the next 3 rounds. That's useful. But because it covers such a huge area, because it locks down so much and it's so obfuscating for you and your party too, I think this will more often than not just extend the counter durations and not add a whole lot of meaningful power to one side or the other in most tables. In the really powerful tables that have very concise plans that know what they're doing, that are here for the power gaming, metagaming stuff, this is where the spell gets quite a bit better. That's definitely not most people, though. That's not the 99% of people playing this game. Most people that are playing this game probably haven't read the entirety of the player's handbook, right? Like that's like front to back. That's not what most people do. Most players haven't done all of that. And they're not going to be the super engaged figuring out with your whole team. And you really need the whole party to be that for this spell to get the absolute most out of it. Where you like tactically can figure out where the monsters can be moving into the area, how best you can use the Sleet Storm to your advantage, or again, where I think the actual use case is, shut down an encounter and run. That's where I think the spell is particularly good.
What about as a concentration breaker?
I think it's overrated. I think breaking concentration is better done with a couple of longbow shots. I think that you can break concentration easier on things like rogues. You're better breaking concentration by just dealing 40 damage to something and making a DC 20 save, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, it would be amazing if you were facing 100 like small time spellcasters that were concentrating on spells at the same time, but that doesn't seem like it's going to come up very often.
And if that is the situation, what spells could they possibly be concentrating on that wouldn't disrupt this? Like, if there are like 8 things with flaming spheres, you're taking a whole lot of damage before you can even get an opportunity. And it doesn't even necessarily break it. It's just an opportunity to break it, right? If you got some creatures mind controlling the barbarian, the Sleet Storm can break it. So can inflict wounds. So can any high damage point and click spell. Like, you don't necessarily need it to be Sleet Storm. And again, Sleet Storm doesn't even guarantee that the effect ends. So I don't know. I think it's the odds of you hitting like more than 2 or 3 creatures that are concentrating our spells seems really slim. And that's
does.
You're not often fighting against large groups of monsters where that matters. Like almost never, frankly.
Why do people love this spell so much?
The heavily obscured condition is typically very good in that, again, once things are in this space, they're going, if they're near the center of it, because if they're on the ground and have a 30-foot move speed, it's going to take them at least 2 turns to get out of it, even with dashing minimum. If they're knocked prone, it's going to take them 3 to 4 turns to get out of it. So this locks down a large area for a while. The reason things like banishment and a lot of the saver dies that remove creatures are so good, typically, is you can remove the threat, deal with the little ones, and then face the big one without the little ones in addition, right? You can split up the action economy. With this, honestly, if you're trying to like isolate a creature, it behooves it then to move into the Sleet Storm, because you have to go into the Sleet Storm to fight it then. You have to deal with it being in a heavily obscured space. So it's not great at isolating any monsters because it covers such a huge area. It's not great at sort of giving you any situational advantage just because it makes it so hard for anyone in your group to be effective. It makes it so hard for anyone in the encounter to be effective. And that's, again, if you're running away, this is one of the best spells at running away. You create a gigantic area, nothing's getting through that area most of the time for any reasonable amount of time. You get a bunch of free dashes the other direction, you're gone, right? This is a get out of jail free card. At higher levels, it's probably nice to have this on hand just to be like, oh crap, we're getting royally screwed. I'm Sleet Storming, let's bail. That's where the spell is at its best. At higher levels, though, you have things like Dimension Door, you have other means of faster travel, maybe. So, it's not always the best then, but it's still useful in that case. I don't know. I think people get excited whenever they see Heavily Obscured. People get excited when they see it knocks a lot of things prone. People get excited whenever you're like, oh, I can drop the Aarakocra out of the sky. You do some of the time. You do most of the time. It's a deck save, so things that are flying are probably going to have high decks anyway.
Well, and it's only 20 feet high. Things that are flying typically, I would imagine, are, yeah. Aside from running away, give me something good about this spell, Sam. It's on my character sheet.
Get it off your character sheet? I don't know. It's hard to use. It's, again, unless you want to just grind the game to a halt for a minute for some reason and make everyone bored, I don't see much use case in it. If you can break parity meaning like you make the effect not bad for you, that's going to come with blind sight, that's going to come with ways to get around the Heavily Obscured condition. That's where the spell's better. If you can be imposing disadvantage on all attack rolls against enemies in the area, and you have advantage on attack rolls against all the enemies in the area because you can see into it somehow, then we're talking about a reasonable spell. And that's not most characters. That's not the majority of characters. You're not going to often see that come up. Even like blind sight is only like 15 feet, and this is 80 feet. Yeah, it's not going to be realistically happening.
I'm going to build my character that way. I'm going to see through obscurity.
Sure. If you find the tools to do it, Godspeed. I believe in you. You can try and make Sleet Storm work. But I mean, you probably, like in all these instances, right, you also have to consider, if this is good at running away, how good would a fireball be? How good would dealing 8d6 to a smaller area, but a large enough area that's encompassing most of the threats? Like, would that make the encounter no longer an encounter we have to flee from? Right? Like, how many situations are you going to be wanting to use Sleet Storm as opposed to just doing 8d6 in an area? Or doing things like suggesting people doing things like even things like that can alter things' minds to move them different places, or give you some other summoning magic to have allies assist you in encounters. Like, there's just more things that will change the time of an encounter than using this just to get out of jail free or grind things to a halt.
Oh, well, I'm gonna do my damnedest to make this work. But I guess that's Sleet Storm.
Yeah.
All right, Sam, give us your score.
I think that as a tool to get out of jail free, that is a redeeming enough quality that this can find a home in your on your sheet in the mid tier of play. If you're talking like, this probably isn't going to be one of the first spells you put in your character sheet when you hit 5th level, but around like 7th, 8th level, if you're looking for new stuff and you're like, we're really over our head most of the time, picking up Sleet Storm is probably going to save some lives. That's the only really redeeming quality I see to it, and I think that justifies a 3 out of 5 because it is very good at doing that.
All right, well, that's Sleet Storm, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and thank you, Sam, for ruining my hope. We will see you next time. Bye-bye. Thank you for watching. If you found this helpful, informative, or entertaining, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like button below. You needn't smash it. A gentle tap will suffice. If you want to see more videos like this, subscribe to the channel. And make sure you check out the links in the description where you'll find my Caverns Creatures series of comedy fantasy novels, our full review of the spell, and other fun things.